I stood at the bank counter, my hands trembling as I held out the old card. The plastic was yellowed and scratched, and I honestly expected the banker to tell me it was expired or worthless. But when Mr. Whitmore took it from my fingers, his face changed completely. All the color drained away like someone had pulled a plug. His eyes went wide, darting from the card to my face and back again. Then he did something that made my stomach drop. He grabbed my wrist, not roughly, but urgently, desperately. "Ma'am, quickly! Look at this!" he whispered, his voice shaking. But I'm getting ahead of myself. 2 weeks before that moment, I thought I knew what my life was. I was wrong about everything. It was a Saturday morning when my marriage ended. I remember I'd made coffee. The expensive kind Richard liked. Even though we couldn't really talk about money anymore without him getting that tight look around his eyes. He sat at the breakfast table, scrolling through his phone, tilting it away whenever I walked past. I'd noticed he'd been doing that for months, working late, coming home smelling like perfume that wasn't mine, flinching when I touched his shoulder. I told myself every marriage had rough patches. We'd been together 12 years. You don't throw that away without trying, right? That evening, he came home with 2 people I'd never met. A lawyer in an expensive suit carrying a briefcase, and her, Patricia, his assistant. She wore a smile that made my skin crawl, like she knew a joke I hadn't heard yet. "Sign these, Clara. Our marriage is over." Just like that. No conversation, no warning. Just papers slapped down on the dining room table where we'd eaten 1,000 meals together. The prenup I'd signed when I was 26, and stupid and in love, it was ironclad. The house was in his name, the cars were in his name. Every bank account was his or hidden in trusts his lawyer had set up. I got nothing. And I had 72 hours to get out. I couldn't breathe. "Richard, what? Why can we just talk about this?" He wouldn't even look at me. Patricia did, though. She looked at me like I was a stain she was about to wipe away. The next 3 days were a nightmare. Richard and Patricia didn't even pretend anymore. I'd come downstairs and find her trying on my jewelry, holding up earrings to her ears and asking Richard what he thought. "Should I keep these or throw them out?" she'd say, and he'd shrug like my things were garbage, like I was garbage. On the second day, I went out to buy boxes. When I came back, the locks were changed. My belongings were in trash bags on the front lawn. Trash bags. Like I was nothing. Neighbors stood in their yards watching, whispering to each other. Mrs. Chen from next door wouldn't meet my eyes. I wanted to scream. I wanted to disappear. I stood there on the lawn I'd planted flowers in, staring at black plastic bags filled with my life, and I couldn't even cry. The tears wouldn't come. My phone didn't work, it was on his plan, and he'd cut it off. My credit cards were declined at the store, they were all linked to his accounts. I opened my purse and counted every dollar and coin I had. $43. That was everything I had in the world. Grace came to get me. My old college roommate, the only real friend I had left. She drove me to her tiny apartment and didn't ask questions when I couldn't talk. Just made up the couch and brought me tea I didn't drink. But I knew I couldn't stay long. Grace was a nurse, living paycheck to paycheck in a 1-bedroom place. I needed money for basic things, food, supplies, a plan for what came next. That night, I went through the last bag Grace had helped me carry from the lawn. Inside was a shoebox I'd saved for years, my father's things, a watch that didn't work, his reading glasses, some old photos, and at the bottom, wrapped in tissue paper, was the bank card. Daddy had given it to me the week before he died, 10 years ago, made me promise to keep it safe. "When you really need it, Clara, you'll know," he'd said. I never understood what he meant. The card was old even then, yellowed plastic with just numbers and my name. No bank logo. Nothing, Just an address written on a slip of paper tucked underneath it. I turned it over in my hands. This mysterious thing my father thought was important. Maybe the account had a few $100s in it. Maybe it was empty. Maybe it was closed years ago. But it was the only thing I had left to try. So the next morning, I walked into First Continental Bank at the address on that slip of paper, feeling foolish and desperate and completely lost. I waited in line behind people in business suits. People who belonged there. When I finally got to the counter, I handed the card to Mr. Whitmore with shaking hands. That's when his face went white. That's when he grabbed my wrist. That's when everything changed. I couldn't look away from the computer screen. The numbers made no sense. There had to be a mistake. Maybe an extra zero? Maybe the decimal point was in the wrong place. But Mr. Whitmore kept talking, his words tumbling out fast and urgent: compound interest, investment portfolios, stock dividends, real estate holdings. None of it sounded real. Your father was. Mrs. Bennet, your father was extraordinarily savvy with investments, almost prophetic in his choices. My father was a maintenance worker, I whispered. He wore the same 3 shirts. We lived in a tiny apartment. We ate rice and beans for weeks sometimes. Mr. Whitmore's expression softened. He got up, locked his office door, and closed the blinds. When he sat back down, he looked at me like I was something fragile that might break. Mrs. Bennet, Reed, I interrupted. My maiden name is Reed. Miss Reed. Your father opened this account 35 years ago with money from an inheritance. He never touched it except to move it between investments. Everything was set to reinvest automatically until you accessed it. He left very specific instructions. He paused. Wait here, please. He disappeared into a back room, and I sat there staring at those impossible numbers on the screen. My hands were numb. My father, who'd patch his work boots with duct tape because new ones were too expensive. My father, who'd told me we couldn't afford the art classes I wanted when I was 15. That man had millions of dollars sitting in a bank. Mr. Whitmore returned with a sealed envelope, my name written across it in Daddy's handwriting. My throat closed up. He left instructions that you should receive this only when you came to access the account. I've been the custodian of this letter for 10 years, Miss Reed. I knew your father. He was a remarkable man. My hands shook so badly I could barely tear open the envelope. The letter inside was 2 pages, front and back, covered in my father's careful script. Asterisk. My darling Clara. Asterisk. Asterisk. If you're reading this, then I'm gone. And you've found yourself in real trouble. I'm sorry I'm not there to help you in person. But maybe this is better. Maybe you needed to do some living first, before you were ready for what I have to tell you. Asterisk. Asterisk. The money in this account came from my father, your grandfather. He made a fortune in manufacturing, and when he died, he split everything between me and my 3 siblings. I watched that inheritance destroy my family. My brother and sisters fought like animals over every dollar. They stopped speaking. They sued each other. My youngest sister died alone because she'd alienated everyone who ever loved her, all for money. Asterisk. Asterisk. I swore you would never be raised around wealth. I swore you'd know struggle, build character, understand the value of things. I wanted you to marry for love, not security. To choose friends based on who they were, not what they could give you. I wanted you to know who you were before you knew what you had. Asterisk. Asterisk. I know it wasn't fair. I know there were times you needed things I could have easily provided. Every time you went without, it broke my heart. But I also watched you grow into someone kind, someone genuine, someone who sees people for their character. You have that because you weren't spoiled by money. Asterisk. Asterisk. If you're reading this now, then you've faced real hardship. Now you're ready. This money isn't to spoil you, sweetheart. It's to free you. To give you choices. To let you build the life you deserve without anyone holding power over you. Asterisk. Asterisk. Use it wisely. Use it kindly. And remember that your worth was never in a bank account. It was always in your heart. Asterisk. Asterisk. I love you forever. Asterisk. Asterisk, Daddy. Asterisk. I didn't realize I was crying until tears dripped onto the paper, smudging the ink. Mr. Whitmore quietly pushed a box of tissues across his desk. He made me promise not to contact you, he said gently. Not to tell you about any of this unless you came here yourself. He said you needed to find your own way first. I wiped my eyes, trying to process everything. My father had let us struggle on purpose. He'd worked maintenance jobs he didn't need because he wanted me to see him as a working man. He'd taught me the value of $1 by making sure dollars were scarce. And all the while, he'd been protecting me from the kind of people who'd want me for my money instead of for myself. People exactly like Richard. What do I do now? I asked, my voice barely working. Mr. Whitmore smiled. Whatever you want, Miss Reed. You have complete freedom. I can set up temporary access cards today. You could check into a hotel, buy new clothes, take time to think. Or we can develop a longer-term financial strategy. It's entirely your choice. I left the bank 2 hours later with a temporary debit card in my wallet and documents I still couldn't quite believe. Grace was waiting outside. I'd borrowed her phone to text her. She took one look at my face and pulled me into a hug. What happened? I couldn't say it out loud yet. Not all of it. So I just whispered, my father took care of me. Even after he died, he took care of me. That night, lying on Grace's couch, I looked up Richard's company on her laptop. His smug face stared back at me from the website. Bennett Development Corporation, his upcoming projects, his public image as a successful philanthropist. There was a photo of him and Patricia at some charity gala, both of them grinning. My phone, my old number that Richard had cut off, still forwarded to my email. There was a message from him waiting. Asterisk. Hope you're not homeless. Though, I suppose that's not my problem anymore. Thanks for the best years of your life. Asterisk. Something cold settled in my chest. Not quite anger. Something sharper, clearer than that. I picked up Grace's phone and called Mr. Whitmore's direct line. I need you to help me understand something, I said quietly. What can money actually do? 3 days later, I sat across from Mr. Whitmore and a younger man named Kevin in a quiet coffee shop downtown. Kevin was a financial advisor, sharp-eyed and professional. I'd bought new clothes, nothing flashy, just simple pieces that fit well and made me feel like a real person again. Grace had helped me pick them out, asking careful questions about where the money came from. I'd told her about a small savings account Daddy left, which wasn't exactly a lie, just not the whole truth yet. I want to understand everything, I told them. Not just the numbers, but what they mean, what I can actually do. Kevin opened his laptop and walked me through it all. The account wasn't just cash sitting there, it was investments spanning decades. Tech companies Daddy had bought into when they were tiny startups, real estate holdings in 3 different states, blue-chip stocks and carefully balanced bonds. The total made my head spin. With this level of wealth, Miss Reed, you have options most people never dream of. You can invest in companies, fund ventures, buy properties. You have influence now, not just money. Access to rooms and conversations that were closed before. Or I could just live quietly and never work again, I asked. Absolutely, for several lifetimes actually. I rented an apartment that afternoon. Nothing crazy, just a furnished 2-bedroom in a nice building with a doorman and big windows. It was the first place that was truly mine in 12 years. I bought books and plants. I got my hair cut and colored at a real salon. Small things that made me feel human again. But I couldn't stop thinking about Richard, about how smug he'd looked in those photos, about Patricia's mocking messages. So I did something I'd never have imagined doing before I hired a private investigator. Joan was a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a no-nonsense manner. Mr. Whitmore had recommended her. I need to know everything about my ex-husband's business, I told her. His company, his projects, his financial situation, all of it. What Joan discovered made me sick. Richard's company was drowning in debt. He'd borrowed from everyone, banks, private investors, even Patricia's father. Everything depended on one massive project called Harbour View Estates, a luxury development on the waterfront. But the whole thing hinged on buying a specific piece of land. If that deal fell through, Richard faced bankruptcy. Patricia wasn't just his mistress, she was an investor's daughter, a strategic choice. The affair started right when his money problems got serious. He used her just like he used you, Joan said flatly. Different reasons, same pattern. There was an investors' event coming up at the Grandview Hotel, high net worth individuals only, discussing real estate opportunities. Richard would be there, pitching his project. Kevin could get me an invitation. I almost said no. What was the point of going? But something pushed me forward. Curiosity, maybe. Or the need to see Richard's world from the outside, as someone he didn't control anymore. The hotel ballroom was full of wealthy people in expensive clothes, holding wine glasses and talking about millions like it was pocket change. I wore a simple black dress and my mother's pearl earrings. I looked nice but not flashy. I could blend in. Across the room, Richard worked the crowd with Patricia glued to his side. She wore a dress that screamed expensive but looked cheap somehow, too tight, too shiny. Richard had that smile he used when he wanted something. But I could see the tension in his shoulders now. The way he held on to conversations too long, laughed too loud at jokes that weren't funny. I stayed on the opposite side of the room, talking to a woman about sustainable building practices. Then Richard's voice boomed nearby, and my heart hammered. I turned slightly away, but he didn't even glance my direction. He was too busy pitching Harbour View to anyone who'd listen. An older gentleman beside me made a skeptical sound. "Bennett's promising the moon with that project," he muttered. "You don't think it's a good investment?" I asked carefully. He looked at me with sharp blue eyes. "Lawrence Blackwood," he said, offering his hand. "And no, I don't. The financing is shaky, and the whole thing depends on land he doesn't own yet." He lowered his voice. "The property owner is my former daughter-in-law. Diane's been approached by a dozen developers, but she's picky about what gets built there. Her late husband loved that waterfront. She won't sell to just anyone." My pulse quickened. What kind of person would she sell to? Lawrence studied me for a moment. Someone who cares about more than quick profits. Someone who'd build something the community actually needs. He smiled slightly. "I like you. You listen more than you talk. Rare quality. Diane's having a small dinner party next week, just a few interesting people. Would you like to come?" I should have said no. I should have stayed invisible, kept my head down, figured out my own life before getting involved in anyone else's. But I heard myself say, "I'd love to." Lawrence wrote his number on a business card. "Good. Diane appreciates authenticity. Something tells me you two will get along." That night, I spread Joan's report across my new coffee table. Richard's vulnerabilities were all laid out in black and white. His timeline, his pressure points, his desperation. He thought he'd thrown me away like trash. He had no idea I was circling his collapsing empire with the power to push it either way. My phone buzzed another photo from Patricia, her and Richard, at the same event I'd just left. "Living our best life," she'd captioned it. I deleted it without responding. I didn't need to respond anymore. I had a dinner party to prepare for. Diane Blackwood's house was the kind of beautiful that whispered instead of shouted. A restored Victorian with original woodwork and stained glass windows, filled with art that looked chosen for meaning rather than price. I'd spent an hour getting ready, changing clothes 3 times before settling on something simple and elegant. My hands were sweating when I rang the doorbell. Lawrence opened the door with a warm smile. "Clara, come in, come in. Diane's been looking forward to meeting you." Diane appeared from the dining room, tall and graceful in her early 50s, with silver threading through her dark hair. She shook my hand firmly, her eyes assessing but kind. "Lawrence tells me you're new to investment circles, but have good instincts." "I'll take instincts over inherited money any day." The dinner was intimate, only 8 people. A museum curator who made me laugh, an architect who designed green buildings, a couple running youth programs in underserved neighborhoods. The conversation flowed naturally, touching on everything from urban planning to art to what makes a community thrive. I found myself relaxing, contributing ideas about long-term value versus quick profit. Diane watched me throughout the meal with an expression I couldn't quite read. After dinner, she invited me to her study for coffee. The room smelled like old books and lemon oil. She gestured to a leather chair and sat across from me, studying me quietly. "Lawrence doesn't bring people into my circle lightly," she began. "He said you were at the Bennett presentation last week. He also said you seemed more interested in watching Richard Bennett than hearing his pitch." She paused. "So I had someone look into you." My stomach dropped, but I kept my face calm. "I know you're his ex-wife. I know he divorced you and left you with nothing. And I know you've recently come into substantial resources that your ex-husband doesn't know about." There was no point lying. "Yes," I said quietly. "That's all true. Why did you accept my invitation tonight?" I met her eyes. "Because Lawrence seemed kind. Because I'm trying to figure out who I am now and what I want to do with an unexpected situation. I didn't come here under false pretenses about any of that." Diane nodded slowly. "Good. I hate dishonesty." She set down her coffee cup. "Here's my position. Richard Bennett has been courting me for 8 months to buy my waterfront property. He's offered above market value, made promises about community benefits he has no intention of keeping. Tried to wine and dine me like I'm some fool." Her voice hardened. "I've watched how he operates. He's a shark in an expensive suit. Then why consider selling at all? Because the waterfront is dying. It needs development, just not his version." She leaned forward. "That area could be something special. Mixed income housing so people aren't displaced. Public spaces everyone can enjoy. Local businesses given real opportunities. Sustainable design that lasts." She looked at me directly. "I'm considering alternative partnerships. People who care about building something meaningful, not just profitable." "Are you that kind of person, Clara?" My heart pounded. I think I could be. I want to be. Over the next hour, Diane laid out a vision that made my chest ache with possibility. She had architects ready, community leaders on board, environmental plans that actually made sense. But she needed investors willing to accept slower returns for better outcomes. "Richard's timeline is aggressive because he's desperate," she explained. "Mine is patient because I'm not. If I invested with you, his project dies," I said slowly. "Yes, and he'd likely face bankruptcy." I sat in silence, thinking about trash bags on a lawn, about Patricia's mocking photos, about 12 years of making myself smaller. But more than that, I thought about my father working maintenance while sitting on a fortune choosing character over comfort, about building something that mattered. I need 48 hours, I said finally, to review everything properly and think. Diane smiled. Take your time. But know that Richard's pushing for my answer by month's end. He doesn't know he has competition. The next morning, my new phone rang with a number I recognized. Richard. Someone must have spotted me at the event, or around town, looking too well dressed for a woman who should be broke. Clara, we need to talk. His voice was tight, controlled. You're living in a nice building. You bought new clothes. Where did you get money? For the first time in 12 years, I didn't shrink from his tone. I'm living my life, Richard. You made it clear I'm not your concern. You signed a prenup. You have no claim to anything of mine. Where did you get money? That's none of your business. I hung up. My hands shook. But not from fear, from the pure rush of finally standing up to him. That evening, Grace cornered me gently. Clara, I know you said savings, but you went from homeless to comfortable in 2 weeks. Whatever's happening, you can tell me. Are you in trouble? I realized I needed to trust someone completely. So I told her everything, the card, Daddy's secret, the investments, all of it. Grace's eyes went wide, then she pulled me into a fierce hug. Your dad was protecting you all along. Then, more seriously. So what are you going to do about Richard? I showed her Diane's project materials. Grace read carefully, asking smart questions. Finally she looked up. This is good, really good. Not just for you, for everyone. Those neighborhoods need this. She paused. But if you do this, Richard loses everything. Can you live with that? I thought about her question long into the night. About 12 years I'd given. About dreams I'd set aside. About being thrown away without a second thought. But more than that, I thought about my father choosing values over comfort. About Diane's vision, serving everyone, not just the wealthy. By morning, I knew. I called Diane. I'm in. Let's build something worth building. Then I called Mr. Whitmore. I need this done properly. Legal. Clean. Transparent. My father taught me values matter more than victory. I paused. But I won't lie, I hope Richard hears about this and realizes exactly who he threw away. Mr. Whitmore's voice warmed. Your father would be very proud of you, Miss Reed. I smiled. Actually, it's just Clara now. Time to reclaim who I really am. The contract signing happened on a Tuesday morning in Diane's lawyer's office. Sunlight streamed through tall windows as I sat at the polished conference table, surrounded by people who'd become more than business partners. They'd become friends. Diane, Lawrence, and 3 other investors who shared our vision. My hand barely shook as I signed my name. Clara Reed. Not Bennett. Never Bennett again. We were shaking hands, celebrating quietly, when Diane's assistant knocked and poked her head in. I'm sorry to interrupt, but Richard Bennett has called 4 times this morning. He's demanding to speak with you, saying he'll match any offer you've received. Diane didn't even blink. Tell Mr. Bennett the property is no longer available. A partnership has been formed. She smiled slightly. Don't mention names. Let him figure it out himself. He figured it out fast. Within 2 days, the real estate publications ran stories about our surprising partnership and community-focused waterfront development. They mentioned a new investor to the market, without naming me. Specifically, but wealthy circles are small. People talk. Joan called with updates. Richard's lenders were panicking. Without the waterfront property, Harbour View couldn't proceed. He was scrambling for alternatives, but nothing worked financially. Patricia's father called in his loan, unwilling to wait for restructuring. Within a week, Richard's company faced foreclosure on multiple properties. Patricia's social media showed her in Paris. Alone. No Richard in sight. 10 days after the signing, my building's doorman called up. "Miss Reed, there's a Richard Bennett here asking to see you. Should I send him away?" My first instinct was to say yes, but something made me pause. "Tell him I'll meet him in the lobby, not my apartment, the lobby." I took my time going down, steadying my breathing. When the elevator doors opened, Richard was pacing near the doorman's desk. He looked terrible, unshaven, wrinkled suit, dark circles carved under his eyes. When he saw me, relief and rage fought across his face. "It's you," he said, his voice ragged. "You're the investor. You did this to me." I stayed near the doorman's desk, keeping distance between us. Several people in the lobby pretended not to watch. "I didn't do anything to you, Richard. I invested in a good project. That's just business. You destroyed my company." His voice rose. "You took everything from me out of spite." "No." My voice stayed calm, almost gentle. "You destroyed your own company by making promises you couldn't keep and borrowing more than you could repay. I just made a choice about where to invest my resources." He stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time in years. Really seeing me. "Where did you get that kind of money? You had nothing. I made sure you had nothing. My father left it to me. The same father whose funeral you skipped for a golf game. The same father you called a simple working man, like it was an insult." I met his eyes. "He was worth more than you'll ever be, Richard, in every sense of the word." The fight drained out of him. He slumped against the wall, looking smaller somehow. "I'm going to lose everything." For just a moment, I felt something almost like pity. Then I remembered the trash bags, Patricia trying on my jewelry, his casual cruelty. "You'll survive," I said quietly. "You're smart and ruthless. You'll figure something out. You just won't do it using me ever again." I turned toward the elevator. His voice stopped me. "I loved you, you know." "In the beginning." I looked back, considering his words. "Maybe you did. But you loved what I gave you more. Someone who asked nothing, expected nothing, made you feel generous without costing you anything." That wasn't love, Richard. That was convenience. The moment I wasn't convenient, you threw me away. I paused. "I don't think you knew what love was. I'm not sure I did either back then. But I'm learning." 3 months later, I stood at the waterfront groundbreaking ceremony. Diane gave a beautiful speech about community and sustainable growth. Local news covered it, interviewing residents excited about mixed-income housing and public spaces. I stayed in the background, content to be private. My role was real, but quiet, exactly how I preferred it. The project introduced me to people I'd never have met before. Architects passionate about green design. Community organizers creating real opportunities. Artists planning public installations. I found myself drawn to the creative aspects, remembering my own abandoned dreams of design from years ago. "You should take classes," Diane suggested one afternoon over coffee. "Explore that interest properly. You have the time and resources now." So I did. Twice a week, I sat in a bright studio learning about color theory and spatial design. I volunteered at a youth center near the development site. I had coffee regularly with Diane and Lawrence, relationships built on mutual respect and genuine friendship. When Grace got engaged to a fellow nurse, I helped plan a simple, beautiful ceremony. At the reception, she pulled me aside. "You're happy, really happy, not just relieved the bad thing is over, but actually joyful. When's the last time I saw you like this?" She was right. I was building a life entirely my own. Almost a year after the divorce, I ran into Patricia at a boutique downtown. She looked harder somehow, tired around the eyes. She froze when she saw me. I heard you were rich now, she said, her voice bitter. Richard says you were rich the whole time, that you played him. I didn't owe her explanations, but I offered truth anyway. I didn't know about the money until after he threw me out. My father left it to protect me from people who'd want me for the wrong reasons. Patricia laughed, but it sounded hollow. Well, congratulations. Richard's broke, working for a former competitor. I'm engaged to someone else now, someone actually wealthy. She paused. We both got what we deserved, I guess. I felt no satisfaction. I hope you're happy, I said, and meant it. She looked surprised. You don't hate me? I did for a while, but hate takes too much energy, and I have better things to do. That afternoon, I visited Daddy's grave for the first time since learning the truth. I brought flowers and sat on the grass beside his headstone. I understand now why you did it the way you did, I told him quietly. You wanted me to know who I was before I knew what I had. You wanted me to choose people based on character. I traced his name with my fingers. I wish you could see what I'm building with your gift, Daddy. It's something that matters. That evening, I stood on my balcony watching the city lights sparkle. My phone buzzed with a text from Diane about Tuesday's board meeting to review my design ideas for the community centre, another from Grace about weekend plans. I thought about titles for my story if I were writing it down. The Woman Who Became Herself, maybe. Or What My Father Knew. But really, the title didn't matter. What mattered was that when Richard threw me out with nothing, he actually gave me everything, the chance to discover who I really was, what I was truly worth, and what I wanted to build with my life. Not his life, not the life of who I thought I should be, my life, and that life, I realized as the city glowed before me, was just beginning.